All right, so I have the honor of introducing our moderator, Dr. Paul Stockton. He is the winner of the longest bio in the agenda, and I encourage all of you to go read it. And I assure you that is probably a fraction of the things that could have been included in his bio. The things this man has accomplished in his life and in his career are really just astonishing. A couple of things, right? Just kind of interesting pieces of information for you to know if you haven't read his bio and you're not familiar with him. Holds a PhD from Harvard University and a BA from Dartmouth College. He was twice awarded the Department of Defense Medal of Distinguished Public Service, which is DoD's highest civilian award. He was also awarded the DHS Distinguished Public Service Medal. Throughout my career, I've been blessed to work on many electric sector specific industry initiatives or projects that have provided me the opportunities to just really work with some brilliant, amazing industry leaders who have over my career have kind of helped shape my thinking on some really complex problems and intersection of government, policy, business, operations, and critical infrastructure. Paul is one of those people that anytime I go into a meeting or into a project or a working group or something and I see Paul is there, I have high confidence that what we're working on is going to be usable and impactful to the industry, and it's going to make a difference. Paul was the Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense from 2009 to 2013. He has led the development of a number of key DoD strategy documents, as well as many industry and DOE related bulk power resiliency focused efforts. As we assembled this amazing group of panelists who you're going to hear from very, very soon, again, from kind of diverse set of industries who are all facing some very unique challenges to their sector and to their organization. And they're all going to provide very unique kind of leadership perspectives on how they're managing those challenges, how they're working through kind of the balance and prioritization. It occurred to me, and I remembered a discussion that I had with Paul very recently, where at the very end, right before we hung up the call, he said, and hey, if there's anything you ever need or that I can do to help, just let me know. And then I looked at this panel and said, Paul is the right person to be moderating this panel without question. He agreed to come here, so we are all blessed to have him. I can't think of anybody better to do this, so I'm very glad my name has come off the slide as a panelist, and Paul Stockton is here to join us. So Paul, I will turn the virtual stage over to you. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today.
Tim, it's an honor to support you, SANS, and the entire team. I would just point out with regard to my long bio, there's a rule in Washington, the longer your bio, the less important you are.
That does not apply here. Thank you, sir.
You know, it's been great preparing for this event because we've got an interesting mix of participants on our distinguished panel, and many of you in the audience. We've got extraordinary expertise in industrial control systems, but others on the call are new to the world of ICS. Many of you will be coming primarily from an IT focus, where threats are different, resilience options are different, but increasingly, as we're going to hear over the course of the day, there's more overlap between IT and OT systems, more two-way flows of threats, and that's part of the challenge we're going to discuss today. Let me give you my own bias, because of course everybody has one. I recover one day at a time from having been Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense. And in the world of industrial control systems, I had two types of threats that I worried about. The first is the direct threat to DoD industrial control systems. Because let's admit, it would be a very bad day if there's an aircraft carrier transiting the Taiwan Straits and all of a sudden somebody magically starts steering the aircraft carrier onto rocks. That's a bad day. Industrial control systems, everything associated with PLCs in the Department of Defense infrastructure and equipment, we need to secure that. But my primary interest in supporting you today is, of course, that indirect threat. The Department of Defense is extraordinarily dependent on civilian-owned and operated electricity, water service, all of the infrastructure sectors represented on this call, and also, very important, our security partners around the world, because they're facing equivalent threats. So we need to have an international approach to this. That's why I'm glad that we have so many security partners represented today. And we can talk about specific threats and mitigation options in that international context, as well as the sector-specific challenges that my panelists are so extraordinarily well prepared to address. So with that, I'd like to begin asking the panelists to introduce themselves, talk about their own biases and perspectives coming in based on their industry experience, and also make a few remarks on the scope of the challenge before I dive in, start throwing some high and tight fastballs at our panelists and have some fun here. Reem, would you mind starting us off, please?
Yes, sure. I would like to thank you all for this opportunity to share knowledge on SANS ICS Summit. Last year, I was there sitting in the audience, learning and having the insights. Today, I'm part of the contributors, and I hope I'm looking forward to also learn and capture even more insights through this. So I highly thank SANS for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Reem, the Kuwait Oil Company CISO, Team Leader of Information Security. I'm also the chairperson for the Cybersecurity Committee of the oil sector in Kuwait, as well as the representative of Kuwait oil and gas sector in the GCC Cybersecurity Committee in the region. I'm also presenting my country in many of forums and groups and committees at a national, international, and regional level. I'm proudly the co-founder and leader team and the leadership team of the Women Cybersecurity Middle East group, where we have more than 1,000 members of ladies in the Middle East who are ranging from high school girls up to executives in cyber, where we are promoting women in that diversity and inclusion. For me, as a background, I have a PhD in business operations. I'm a computer engineering bachelor, and I'm ICS in my heart. I've been there in the IT for more than 20 plus years. I've been involved in the ICS even through my discussions with Anissa here, who I'm privileged to be sharing the panel with her and my colleagues here. That I found out just yesterday that we have been working on the same projects of Kuwait digital oil fields back in the early 2007. It's a small world, so I was there in the fields leading the digital oil fields since the start. Even before that, I was also working the wireless interconnectivity in the fields. The role I'm today playing as a CISO was really, let's say, emphasizes the concerns that I have been collecting as experience throughout the years. I believe we have been put on this journey to collectively build the experience for us needed to secure these critical assets. Being a CISO of a very critical national infrastructure, especially in Kuwait and the region, where we contribute into the national income of more than 90%, puts the burden of how cybersecurity and the cyber risk here, especially in the ICS environment, have that physical arm to harm or impact the safety of people. It's very challenging to be a CISO of such entities because other entities that doesn't have the ICS part, the impact will never reach up to the safety or lives of humans. While us here in the ICS environment, we are have the burden and responsibility to address this. So the main challenges is to make sure that we address these risks and enable the business at the same time and make sure that we're doing our best in maintaining the people, process, and technology while we're doing that job. And every day we wake up from our beds going to our work, we have that concern of securing our people's lives, of securing their safety and enabling our business and meeting our country's production targets as well. So this is in short my challenges and my responsibility that I'm today addressing.
Thanks so much, Reem. That's great. Anissa, would you mind going next, please?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. And again, it's a definitely an honor to be here with the fellow panelists, and it is quite a small world. Reem and I had a short conversation and very quickly found a lot of commonalities. So it's amazing to know that in such a short time you can cross paths with so many people across the world. But I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm the Chief Security Officer as well as VP of Supply Chain here at Calpine Corporation. Calpine, in essence, is a US-based power generation company. We produce about 26,000 megawatts of power, which is equivalent to about 20 million homes. And we do so with natural gas-fired power plants, as well as one of the largest geothermal assets in the world. Here at Calpine, I've been here about 6 years. I've had escalating levels of responsibility, starting out with really developing our cyber program from the ground up. From an IT perspective as well as an OT perspective. Shortly thereafter, I picked up our IT compliance organization and really started out on the trek for NERC SIP, as many of you may have the same responsibilities. And then shortly thereafter, picked up physical security, business continuity, and facilities, and now run our entire supply chain organization. So definitely no rest for the weary, like most CISOs, we're all pretty type A. But, you know, as I think about my career, not just at Calpine, the foundations were set very early. I spent about 5 years working for the federal government for the DEA, really imparting the ability to have digitized networks in that arena, and thought, no way I want to ever do this IT stuff. But shortly after I put in a secure network up to DC from a local field office, I guess I caught the snag that was never going to let me go. And so I left there thinking I was going to be an agent, but ended up at Baker Hughes, well, PwC and then Baker Hughes. I spent 10 years at Baker Hughes, and in the first few years, kind of hiding away doing SAP security, but was given the opportunity very shortly thereafter, as the threats began to rise against the energy sector, to create our first CISO office. And believe it or not, that CISO office was created in the early 2000s, so think 2008 era, which seems very late to the game. But at that time, we were only 30 to 20 years behind our competitors, but it was very new to all of us. And unfortunately, that we were at the cross section of when the threats were rising the most towards the energy sector, or at least we thought. And so building out the first CISO office, one of my first projects was securing the new digital oil fields we were going to create. And that's when Reem and I crossed paths. So certainly the threats have not been any less in the last 15 years. They've ratcheted up, but certainly there was a lot to be learned in the oil and gas industry about how to digitize our assets, how to segment networks, what cybersecurity really meant. And as I entered into the Calpine organization and understanding the risks and threats of the electrical sector, which, as you may or may not know, the regulatory, I would say, frameworks have only tightened down. In some ways, maybe those were it was the right time to tighten them down, because we're only seeing more and more threats come against our electrical grids. As we see the weather patterns change, it's only going to be tougher and tougher to keep these grids up and going with the demands that we see. We all expect that light switch to come on. We all expect to be able to power up our phones and our computers when we need them. But it takes a lot of generation. It takes a lot of partnership across the grids to make them work. And you know, when weather patterns do happen, it will be interesting to see if our threat actors are going to give us any relief. You know, they're becoming more brash. They're becoming more sophisticated. And while we're continuing to keep pace, there's certainly, what keeps me up at night is, are we keeping pace enough? So I'll end it with this. In addition to the regulations and the adversarial activity increasing, Our control systems, while our fleet is relatively new, we do upgrades, right? And so as we look at those upgrades and as we see the IT/OT systems begin and continue to converge and become smarter, we really need to begin asking ourselves the questions: are we engineering the security up front? Or are we going to learn from the lessons of the past and engineering in the end and cost us more? So certainly open to those conversations. And Paul, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Anissa, including for that last emphasis on let's be smart as our systems get digitized. Let's not play catch up later when we find out they've been penetrated. Let's build some security into those ICS systems right now as we move forward. We'll talk about that more. Thomas, if you wouldn't mind going next, as a frequent drinker of DC water for over a decade, and also use of the wastewater system, I'll leave that to your imagination. Grateful for the resilience of everything that you've been leading.
Thank you, Paul. This is Tom Kaczynski. I'm Vice President of Information Technology at DC Water. I also run DC Water's non-ratepayer affiliate, Blue Drop, which is charged with trying to generate revenue outside of the ratepayer base to supplement rate increases. Just in way of background, I have almost 40 years in information technology. I spent about 9 years in the wholesale energy trading and risk management space back in the late 90s and early 2000, working for what we used to refer to as the honest Enron in that business. Also have an extensive background in retail natural gas, retail electric, and now at DC Water. Just to give you a sense for DC Water, we deliver about 100 million gallons of fresh water a day to the District of Columbia, about 700,000 plus residents, 1.5 million workers a day when we're open, and almost 22 million visitors annually to the District of Columbia. We also operate the largest advanced wastewater treatment plant in the world at Blue Plains. We process about 300 million gallons a day of wastewater for both the district and the surrounding counties through that facility. And our water actually leaves that facility cleaner than it comes in for drinking water at the Great Falls intake. So it's a pretty impressive facility if you've never seen it. From an infrastructure perspective, we've got 4 distinct networks that we manage. We manage a IT network that has about 3,500 connected devices. We manage a process control network, which operates our wastewater treatment plant, that has about 45,000 connections, and they are both analog, digital, and they're wireless in many cases as well. We have a SCADA system that operates the distribution and conveyance systems throughout the district that has about 10,000 connections, some wired, some wireless. And then we operate our meter reading system, which has 92 collectors that has a cellular backbone and then a 100 megahertz radio uplink from about 130,000 meters a day. We manage cybersecurity for the entire enterprise in my office, both from a strategy, implementation, and compliance perspective. Just to, and as some of the biggest challenges we have, obviously, were a transition to work from home as a result of the pandemic. So we've been operating remotely, the entire company, with the exception of the field forces, since last April. And that's substantially, exponentially increased the edge of our network. So, we've got 500 plus individuals working from home on a mix of technologies. It accelerated our migration to multi-factor authentication across the enterprise, as well as changed a lot of our patching and backup and recovery procedures as well, and data exchange controls as well. So that's been a large issue for folks that we actually were an early adopter of the NIST cybersecurity framework. That is the outcome of Executive Order 13636, which was published back in 2013, which actually provides a 5-pillar strategy for managing cybersecurity for critical assets. So we were an early adopter of that and have a robust compliance program, but also have a robust response and recovery capability managed by our internal cybersecurity team. For folks that have not heard of the Oldsmar incident, that was the water treatment plant down in Florida, just outside Tampa. Certainly has raised concern in the sector about cybersecurity to a level that is, significant at this point, had it not been in the past. And it's actually raised a lot of the emphasis to the board levels of utilities like us as well now. So unlike electric and gas industries where there's typically been an emphasis at the board level for managing cybersecurity, that has not always been the case in water. But the Oldsmar incident actually has re-emphasized cybersecurity in the water sector. And folks are actually revisiting a lot of the controls and processes that they have in place. Beyond that, SolarWinds, conventional wisdom was patch, patch, patch. Now you have to worry about whether or not your patch is actually your compromise, which is a significant concern for folks. So, while we all rushed to make patches as quickly as possible to keep our systems protected, now we have to ensure that those patches that we're getting are also secure as well. And lastly, I'd say, the number of zero-day attacks or zero-day risk has increased substantially over the last year. Just last week, both Microsoft and Google had issues with zero-day threats on their environment. So those are huge challenges going forward for the enterprise.
Tom, that's great stuff. And thank you for raising the Florida incident and the importance of situational awareness over OT systems. Fortunately, a human got in the loop and prevented the system from suffering as much disruption as otherwise would have been possible. But we'll talk a little bit later about the importance of maintaining logs and situational awareness in the ICS realm as opposed to the IT realm, where it's ubiquitous and normal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mikhail, thanks for having been a great battle buddy for me for many years now. You do wonderful things, not just for your company, but industry-wide. You've been a leader for a long time. I'm so grateful you were able to join us on the panel.
It's my pleasure, and thank you, Paul. Always enjoy conversation with you and Tim and Rob and everybody else. Anything we can do together, right, strengthens us across the country and industry overall. So my name is Mikhail Falkovich. I am the Director of Information Security for Consolidated Edison Company of New York. And in this role, I lead a diverse and dedicated team of professionals to ensure that we protect both the company and our customers from impacts of cyber attacks on New York City. Just a couple of words about Con Edison. It was founded in 1823 as the New York Gas and Light Company. And we provide electric, gas, and steam service for the 10 million people who live in New York City and Westchester County. We're also the second largest solar producer in North America. So there's a lot to protect. A little bit about myself. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering from Cornell University. I have over 20 years of industry experience, both building systems and control system infrastructures, as well as working with the industry on security and compliance efforts. And as part of my work with the New York subcommittee, I have chaired the Control Systems Security Working Group and was the chair when we developed the Control Systems Electronic Connectivity Guideline that is actually publicly available on the New York website. And it has pretty good architectures there. With regards to what am I most concerned with, there are a number of issues. One is that oftentimes we as individual entities, as companies, fight the battle on our own. And a lot of my time and effort are spent in coordinating our defenses and making sure that we look at this nationwide, industry-wide, right, that we are fighting the battle together. Because if we pool our resources, because there's never enough resources, then we can do wonderful things, both from an protection, detection, and response capabilities. And the second piece, I would say, is actually the availability of those resources, right? So it's very difficult to find someone who knows IT, who knows OT, who knows information security, and who understands compliance, because being the industry with mandatory and potentially high impact regulations, right, on the bottom line, that compliance piece is crucial. And then there's always this, I'd say, diverse pull, right, whether I need to be compliant or whether I need to be secure. And one does not mean the other at all, right? And the compliance is that minimum set of controls that is expected of me, but there's so much more that we need to do to protect our systems and to protect our data. And maybe the final piece that I'll mention is that concept of digitization that my previous co-panelists have mentioned. And the idea there is that the current solutions that come to us, both from a data analytics perspective and even a architecture or support perspective, come to us from the cloud, right? Very, very few vendors now create things to be built and designed on premises. And as a supporter of critical infrastructure, and electricity is the base of the critical infrastructure sectors, right? None of the others work if there's no electricity. Then how do we protect these assets if they're relying on the cloud? So that trade-off is a very interesting challenge to mitigate and manage, right? That capability of the cloud that provides you that operational function, and the fact that now you're communicating outside of your environment. And it's, I'm always afraid, and I always put in so many barriers in place to make sure that while we provide the appropriate operational capability for the business, we build it out secure and protected with, I would say that I have kind of my statement is defense in depth, which is multiple layers of defense, and defense in breadth, which implies multiple controls at each layer. So those are my challenges, and we kind of fight every day to make sure that everything is protected and secure.
Excellent, Mikhail. Well, I've got a series of questions now that I'd like to share with our panelists. We'll take about 15 minutes for that, and then we'll open it up to comments and questions from our terrific participants out in the audience world. So I'd ask you to keep your answers very brief and very pointed, be as specific as you can. And I'll ask you to answer these questions in the same order that we conducted the introduction. So Reem, you're up first. What are the most severe challenges you're facing right now in the oil and natural gas sector? You've enjoyed Triconex, you've had wiper events, all kinds of other threats. Tell us what's number one for you right now, and what you intend to do about it in 2 minutes.
Okay, so all what my panelists here, colleagues has shared is maps to these challenges. Actually, to prioritize them is one of the things that we need to focus on. Maybe I would relate to Mikhail's point when he said that we have defense in depth and defense in breadth. Maybe the biggest challenge I can see that for these different and various layers of defense, it's not about adding an additional layer to be more secure. It's actually about how you can make best of these existing layers where they can act smarter, absorb faster, and be able to attend the incidents in proper manner. So if we have this layers of interaction and communication where we can really relate all these different layers of defense, where it was from firewalls, or where some colleagues call them paper bags because of the improper configurations, where all of these different components really talk collectively to each other and give the proper visibility for us as security professionals in order for us to be able to absorb the abnormalities and react faster. This is one of the biggest challenges, is that we have investment of technologies, but are we really utilizing them at its best to secure our premises? The other challenge maybe for us in energy sector is the digitalization with the pandemic, and the push for oil and gas markets and the drop in the prices has really pushed so many maps and so many roadmaps of digitalization that were mapped for 5 years to be accelerated and increased in the short periods, which really means the more processes that get digitalized, the more threat risk vector you're actually increasing. With these risks, you need to have the proper business secured and the proper mapping and balance, where my always executive and leadership are keen to secure because of the critical of our infrastructure and impact of our national economy. However, we still have some targets of productions to meet at a national and regional level. So to be that cyber defender and to be the business enabler at the same time, in order for us to cope up and become the partners of business rather than the showstoppers is one of the main challenges for us to cope up with this rapid acceleration. Yeah.
We'll come back to a couple of those points. That's great. Anissa, what keeps you up at night?
Sure. Look, I think all of us know from a geopolitical standpoint, the pandemic has put extreme stressors on all countries. And so not sure if that's motivated, stoked, or re-energized our threat actors and adversaries, but they seem to be much more brash, as I mentioned before, and much more intrinsically motivated to go after every industry, right? We were just speaking a moment ago about 0 days. I think many of us were focused on trying to get that Microsoft Exchange flaw remediated over the last 48 hours, right? But let's pivot and say those same 0-day vulnerabilities begin hitting us in real fashion in the industrial control side. Are we prepared to be able to respond in that level of fashion with the talent that we have on our teams? That keeps me up at night. There aren't enough Rob Lees in the world to be able to assess and react, and therefore our teams need to come up to those levels and understand those threats. And so one of the areas that we continue to drive our talented folks into is let's go get some experience within the plants, but let's continue the purple and red and blue team exercises, continue to make sure that we're ready. But certainly that's what's keeping me up at night, because if our threat actor groups are what they were on the IT side and they're growing at the state of the volume that they are now, which is exponential, either they were always there or we're just now seeing them, we all should be highly concerned, because it means we all need to raise our game a few levels.
I agree. And we have to assume that China and Russia are keeping their very best ICS attack modes in their back pocket, waiting for the crisis to occur. We ain't seen nothing yet.
That's right.
Tom, when I was in the Pentagon, I used to say, Pentagon, even a good day, a blue sky day, it's not so great. No water or wastewater service, the bad guys get a mission kill. So what's keeping you awake at night, and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, I guess, the first thing is, we have to realize we're in a 24/7 business now when it relates to cybersecurity. I mean, the bad guys don't rest. Most of them are 12 hours behind us or 12 hours ahead of us on any given day. The reality is their ability to act is much more rapid and much more complete. Most are much more well funded than any of us could possibly dream to be. And they're far more malicious in their intent in a lot of cases than they ever were before. I mean, we're not talking about hacking websites anymore or stealing a couple credit card numbers. I mean, we're talking about people like in Oldsmar that literally tried to over chemicalize the water supply and literally would shut that city down if that had actually happened. Unlike electric and gas, not to pick on them, I spent a lot of time in those industries as well. You can't occupy a facility without water and wastewater services. It's the only utility you can't occupy a building without. So it's a tremendous responsibility we have. I think vigilance is extremely important. We talked about people and the responsiveness of people say, see something, say something. But, at the end of the day, people are our biggest risk as well as they are our biggest protections. I mean, failing to put a patch in or, failing to respond quickly enough to a potential event it could be catastrophic. And then you have the whole, insider threat concerns that you have. I mean, there's just so many issues and so many avenues to consider when you have to protect the environment, as Mikhail said, and Anissa said, and Reem said. I mean, defense in depth is essential. The defense in breadth is essential, but don't assume just because you have that you're protected. You still need the eyes and the ears of the enterprise. People ask me how many people I have working for me in cybersecurity. I tell them 2,000, because every resource that connects a computer to the system is a potential cybersecurity asset for me, because the littlest thing could turn into the biggest problem at the end of the day.
Very good. Well, Mikhail, just in case New York City was a target, much less your broader service area, tell us a little bit about what you're prioritizing right now as specific threats to your systems and what you're doing about it.
Sure thing. And I'm very lucky to work in a company that actually recognizes that threat and the fact that New York City is a big target and that we are a big part of that target. So luckily, the organization is able to actually support us in our efforts. I'll build on what Reem and Tom mentioned, right? So Reem said firewall misconfiguration, right? That's a big thing, right? I completely agree. And I will actually expand that to say misconfiguration of anything, any IT or OT asset. And then Tom, to your point of adversaries are becoming more rapid, right? So how do you address inherent potential risk of implementing security and with the velocity of that risk to impact your organization through and through? And I'll add that the insider threat that was also mentioned earlier includes supply chain threat. We buy things and we rely on our vendors to provide us secure infrastructures. And I've seen many, many vendors have hiccups, let's call them that, over the past year and a half, and that has really, really escalated. So for me, we have to look at that field of play, and we need to be able to identify that anomaly, right? Detect that bad thing that's happening in our environment, and recognize that when we detect it, having an individual go through logs or look at a screen, right? While they may be able to do that, that's not real time enough, right? We need to have that automation to both detect, alert, and then respond to a thing so that we can apply our defenses appropriately and react to the bad thing as it happens, instead of waiting for hours or days or weeks before it's identified. So my goal is to have that capability in play where we see the bad thing and we know that it is truly bad, right? Where the false positives are limited, and that we are able to route it and process it fast enough where if the bad thing occurs, it does not impact us or impact our customers, impact New York City. We got to protect.
Great stuff, Mikhail. I want to drill down on an issue that a number of you raised in your comments here, and that is the accelerating digitization of all of the sectors represented here. But also, I want to have you say a few words about convergence of IT and OT systems, federated software. I mean, it's much more efficient. You can save a lot of money and blah, blah, blah. It creates opportunities for threats that I don't think we are fully capturing. So if you could talk about both of those phenomenon and what should we be doing to, as Anissa said earlier, build some resilience into our transformation towards digitization, but also increasingly federated and converged IT and OT systems. And Anissa, I'm sorry, Reem, in fact, let's go backwards. Mikhail, let's make you go first. You poor SOB.
Okay, so how can we manage digitization? So there are two parts, right? So that microsegmentation and segmentation capability, where we create those defenses in depth, where if one firewall breaks or falls, then we can actually have time to shore up our other bulwarks. And the idea that resilience, right, as Anissa mentioned earlier, what we can do is we have to be able to operate inside an island. So I should be able to disconnect my control system environment and still be able to operate appropriately. And it's becoming more and more challenging now because our customers rely on information, right? But there are tools and techniques that are available to you to disconnect and then yet provide the services that you still need to provide on that OT space. With regards to convergence, it's an interesting question, Paul. And I'll say that I believe that a lot of the tools can perform the same task, both in the IT and the OT space, but there's a high watermark, right? You cannot treat an IT tool as sufficient if it's managing your OT space from the IT environment. You can never have an inbound from untrusted to trusted communication. You really need to have those two separate environments, and you can have maybe similar tools and mechanisms to monitor, manage, secure, analyze, detect, and respond, but you really need to have those two functions separate so that if you do need to break in between and operate separately, that you are able to both manage and operate separately. So that would be my answer.
Great stuff. Tom, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, well, you know, convergence has been occurring for the last 20 years as it relates to the underlying infrastructure that's being used in the OT environment versus the IT environment. The fact is that, you know, open systems compared to proprietary architectures in the old SCADA and PCS world or DCS worlds, they don't exist anymore. So the threats that we all have in the IT space, we also have in the OT space. And one of the challenges is the OT space operates very differently from a performance and a communications perspective compared to the IT system. So it's much more difficult to patch it as quickly as you can potentially patch the IT systems, both because of the nature of the system and its need to operate critical infrastructure, but also in some cases you're dealing with individuals who have for years never patched, you know, an environment. So you've got to get past that as well. So, you know, there's some cultural adjustments that have to occur both on the IT side and the OT side to be able to manage these environments more efficiently, but not compromise their ability to perform. But I think, you know, to Mikhail's point, you know, you also need to be able to segment these things very quickly, even down to an individual device if you have to. And you can't do that, or we're getting to the point where you can't do that manually anymore. It has to be an automated function. Your systems need to have the capacity and the capability to detect a threat or detect the potential of a threat and be able to isolate that device until you confirm or refute the fact that it truly is a threat and let it back on the network. And I think, you know, really that's the space that there needs to be a lot more attention paid to increase the resiliency of these underlying systems so that a single device can't literally compromise an entire network or even more importantly, in the form of a ransomware attack, the underlying data that's required to run that network, right? Sure. So we need tools that are better able to respond to true incidents more quickly and isolate those incidents so that we have the time to determine whether or not it's a true threat or not.
Right on. Anissa, your thoughts?
Sure. I will echo Tom's Tom's comment that IT/OT convergence has been going on for quite some time. We mentioned early in the call, Reem and myself were doing digital oil fields in 2007, right? So the digitization and the convergence between IT and OT is not anything new. I think it's more, the architecture is one thing, but we need everyone in the ecosystem that's providing us services and products to be nodding their heads, talking about secure architectures as well. As we digitize, we're putting new systems in, and I mentioned this in my intro. I firmly believe our supply chains need to be thinking about cyber engineering as much as they're thinking about selling us the products. I want to be able to sit down at the table with some of our electrical providers, and some of them are getting there, right? And be able to have a real conversation about security, not we have antivirus and we can run it for you. No, I want to know that from the front to the back of your organization, you have an awareness program, you believe in cybersecurity architectures, you are training your people, to Tom's point, all 2,000 people or all 50,000 people are fully ingrained in understanding from a cultural perspective, because I think at the end of the day, we can only do so much in our own silo. When the entire ecosystem understands what the boilerplate rules of the game are from a cybersecurity perspective, when they're building the software, there's some fundamental things that need to be put in place. Concepts like defendable code and self-healing code seemed way far away in the early 2000s. Now it's like, with machine learning and AI, why can't we have it, right? And so when I think of the OT space and where we're going with the OT space, the cloud can't be a scary place for us anymore, right? We need to make it a place where it's not so scary because we're comfortable with the layers of controls and the breadth and depth we've all been talking about. It doesn't get there unless we start giving them our ICS use cases. And I think through the conversations I've been having, everyone's scared, right? That, oh my goodness, there's no way we can push these industrial control systems to where we've pushed our IT systems. But believe it or not, if you pull those covers back, it's a Dell box, it's a Cisco switch, it's a Juniper switch. Yeah, their IT's there.
Yeah.
We're just using it for a different purpose,
Yeah.
right? And so
Absolutely. And I'd
factor
say,
and function, I think we need to be aware of that.
and I'd say in addition to making sure we have defensible code, I'd say let's build an attestation system that understands that supply chains for software are global and that bad guys will seek to exploit that. Okay, well, Reem, you get the last word.
So being the last one who talk, will have a little bit difficulty in not repeating all what have you said, because all of them just maps very directly to my daily operations and my daily concerns when we talk about digitalization. Calling it convergence or integration makes sometimes for me a difference, because integration will really align with Mikhail's points where he said we need to have some way of segregation where if things goes bad, we'll be able to disconnect. I know there's some people think it's a myth to have an air-gapped environments, because there's always a week, a way to communicate. There will always be an HMI that's being presented in a digital dashboard for executive and leaderships and all of that. But we do need the segmentation of micro and macro when we talk about digitalization, because yes, if there's an incident, we would go for that solution, and we'll all go with that extreme depending on the incidents. One of the things that we need to consider in the digitalization journey, which Anissa said we have started very long time ago, that the focus of cybersecurity, where we used to be under the IT, stuck in that down corner, now we're being front and center when it comes to digitalization, being looked as partners rather than service providers. We're being involved at stage zero, and being involved at stage zero and the design stage really reduce the risk of we look as showstoppers, because if we are being involved at the early stages, then we're there to secure the whole stages, and thus there will not be any reworking or additional controls to be added at the last stage before the launch. This whole of understanding where security need to be injected at stage 0 helps reduce the showstopper stereotype of security and became to be looked at as business enablers. So the last maybe thing about digitalization and that we need really to look at is, like my colleague says, and I will also echo Tom's, where we need really to focus on our people. And I highly believe that if we talk about our cybersecurity workforce, it's the whole enterprise, whether it was the OT environment or it was the IT environment, because with the innovation of the threat actor, they can very be innovative in their lateral movement from the IT to the OT. So we need really to raise the awareness. We need to do the investment in our human factors and stop calling them as our weakest link and start looking them as our strongest link, because in these OT incidents, we're very much different than IT incidents, because when an OT incident happens, it's being targeted by a nation state, where we all are aware of that. And when this nation state target or incident attacks happen, it's very sophisticated and becomes the resistance and innovation and sophistication comes along with that. And sometimes technology fails us. However, our human factor, if we invest them in them properly, they are become our first line of defense and raising the flags of any abnormality they would witness in that environment.
That is eloquently put. Well, I want to thank my panelists for putting up with my questions, but Jim, I see in the Q&A box, there's some terrific questions from the panelists. So I'll turn it over, I'm sorry, from the audience. So I will turn it over to you now to manage things and hand out the Q&A to our panelists.
Thank you all very much. And I will warn you when you get to the hallway, there's a ton of questions that we will not be able to go through here. I wanted to do a couple of things. So our next talk is at 3:05. So we do have some time for questions. And Paul, I think I would like to start by turning your evil back on you and ask, in your kind of working projects and things you're looking at and things you've heard on this panel, what keeps you up at night? What's your number one concern? Where do you point kind of yourself to go address what you think is biggest problem that you're facing or industry is facing today?
I think it's underestimating the threat that China and Russia will compromise equipment and software in all of the sectors represented here. We have a very primitive understanding right now of how adversaries would not only penetrate supply chains for gas, electric, water systems, but what they're going to do once they've penetrated those systems. It does no good for Xi Jinping to all of a sudden have all of the substations for Con Ed fail at a predetermined hour. The bad guys need to time their attacks for maximum leverage in a crisis between the United States and China. They're going to need to maintain persistent command and control over corrupted industrial control systems so that they can take them out at a time that coerces US leaders to back down in the crisis. So we need to start thinking more seriously about what the full kill chain looks like, how they actually conduct an attack with the compromised systems, for example, that Fairfax Water provides to the Pentagon. And then think about, oh, well, if they have to maintain persistent command and control, what kind of cool countermeasures does that make possible for us? Let's think beyond the narrow, oh, the bad guys are getting into our hardware and software. Let's think in a more sophisticated way. I'm afraid we're not doing that, and China and Russia are doing that every day.
It's an important message, I think, for current asset owners, practitioners, everybody kind of working in this space, that I think this panel did a great job of gathering, is looking towards adversarial actions. Everybody immediately starts to think about, what if they got in and caused this type of outage, or what if this type of thing happened? And I think a number of people on this panel and attendees at this conference, over the years, we've matured to the outage isn't the worst thing that could happen. The equipment damage and the misuse of the system and the loss of integrity over the system, that is the worst thing that could happen. And in many cases, in order to achieve that, the system needs to be up. It needs to be up and active and high value rotating equipment and energized systems. The bullet has to be in the gun. Causing an outage unloads the weapon to cause greater impact. So the outage isn't the worst case scenario. With 10 minutes that we have, and we're going to dive into very nuanced questions, so it's going to have to be rapid, quick fire answers. And definitely we don't have time to kind of go through all. So if as you're hearing me talk about a topic, it's something that you've faced specifically and you're very passionate about it, just take the baton as fast as you can. There's a number of discussions that I think people who are new to the space, or as they're hearing about IT and OT convergence, they're starting to understand kind of the different technologies and different devices and different protocols. But as they hear that kind of term get used almost like it's a new thing, but then they hear responses that, yeah, we've been doing that for 20 or 30 years. Really just kind of focusing on from an IT and OT technology and protocol and applications and software, there's been a lot of convergence that's happened over the last 3 or 4 decades. But really, as this group of people talks about it, and we discuss those terms kind of from a nuanced, we're talking about in a lot of ways the organizational convergence of where we're bringing kind of different groups, different areas of responsibility together. And if anybody really feels strongly about, what your organization has done from a staffing and a resource, and tried to merge those 2 different groups with different areas of control or responsibility, if somebody wants to grab that baton and talk about where you've seen wins and where you've seen failures.
So Tim, I'll give a quick note, right? Literally 1 minute answer. We recognize the importance of IT and OT convergence and working together to solve problem and protect the assets that we have. And in a lot of organizations, that conversation and that relationship may not exist as seamless as it needs to be. So there are a couple of things that I've done to work with my OT counterparts and IT counterparts, right? One is joint training development. We go after the same objectives, and then we train our users and those control center operators to detect and to understand the potential impacts and actions that are expected of them in a cyber attack. And what is normal as a blue sky day normal, and what is abnormal during a blue sky day, right? If they know what the operating issue is and it's operating related, then that's one thing. But if they don't understand or cannot explain that operational event, then call me, call my team, and we will help you figure that out. And then the other thing is you need to work together, both on your policies, processes, and procedures, right? Even though I may not be responsible for a specific OT asset and the security of that OT asset, I'm right there in the thick of it when they're deploying it, designing it, implementing it, and when they have an issue with it. There's literally a bat phone where the control centers around New York City would call my cybersecurity operations center if something occurs, and I have that same connection to them where it's a trusted communication. And those regular communications and regular touch points between the IT and OT personnel is crucial to your success, to anyone's success.
Great. I have 2 more nuanced questions. I imagine I'm only going to be able to get through one, but working in critical infrastructure, you would sort of be prepared for a bad event that would happen, and kind of the journalist approach of, hey, Tim, would you think that the outages that we're experiencing are due to a lack of investment from your utility or due to a lack of focus on this type of risk? And really a lot of the conversation gets lost around we're not operating with limitless budgets, and we're operating with ratepayer or taxpayer dollars or investor, and the things that need to be balanced. And each one of us kind of would walk into a room and have meetings with executive boards and councils, and almost like you're schizophrenic with multiple personalities, you're balancing risks in your mind of IT risk, OT risk, actual operational risks. You might be prioritizing and campaigning for a very important security stack or solution, while there's a person next to you from operations that is campaigning for the same, hey, you're asking for millions of dollars to protect an asset that is currently 60 years old. And we need to focus on bringing that asset itself up and operational and making sure it is reliable and resilient. And we're operating it in the correct ways and securing paths. So I know many of you may have been trained to kind of bypass those questions around asset prioritization and project and prioritization, but kind of looking towards a non-limitless budget and kind of being in the room with C-level individuals kind of how do you balance that? Your peers in your organization may be, every nail they're hitting with the hammer, that every dollar should go to operations, every dollar should go to business, every dollar should go to cybersecurity. How are you prioritizing kind of your voice in that room to make sure your needs and your risks are being met? Anybody who really wants to own that one, fire away.
If I may take this one and actually reflect the prioritization of assets or the budgeting, which at these days we're looking at either cost optimization or cost cuttings. Hopefully, most of us in this critical infrastructure are adopting the cost optimization, where we're upon the priorities of these projects, will be doing the cost effectiveness. I will add or answer this perspective from Mikhail's perspective when he said that we need to map both IT and OT. We need to have a joint agenda, joint objectives, and sometimes even the projects should be a joint as a roadmap. So when we tackle these, let's say, legacy systems, we need actually to have this shared KPI and build that roadmap together, where we will recommend jointly that this is the best approach for your operations, and we're helping you in that option. Actually, when we build our trust with our OT officials or our OT people, we work on the trust, like Mikhail said. They need to trust us. Before it was all, this is their area, their homes, and for us, for them, we are outsiders. We're one way or another, they will always look at us as IT. But now with our responsibilities with IT and OT to secure all of these assets, it's information and security. So we need to gain their trust. And with that trust being built very closely and very transparently, they will let us join them in their roadmaps and their projects, and such work as one team, where we will be budgeting these projects and budgeting the priorities. And the last thing I would say, and we need to stop talking security to our executives. They need us to talk to them in the business language. We need to talk to them in the risk language, highlighting the impacts rather than making them lost with acronyms of our collateral movement, PLCs, impacts, malwares, all of that. We need to translate it into the business numbers. What will be the production loss if that attack happens? What will be the impact on safety, health, and security when that attack happens? So these things that we need to keep in mind, so we don't lose our executive attention and focus and buy-in as well when we start talking to them in that C-suite room and board.
That's great. We have 1 minute left. Dr. Paul Stockton, would you like to say any final words?
I've spoken too much. Tim, what I would like you to do is put a wrap on this for us. You're so worldly wise in the realm of ICS. SANS is such an important leader for us. Why don't you put the cherry on top of the ice cream sundae?
I think from the perspective of this panel, some of the most important things are really kind of understanding the differences between IT and OT, and each person kind of working in their silo of excellence in whatever job they're in, whatever role they're performing, kind of rolling that up. And for people at this CISO level, for a variety of different industries, to sort of bring that together, balance all those risks, and then being able to explain it in a way that the boards and the executives need to understand, and sort of knitting together your organization in a way that is really focused on what your purpose is, from a critical infrastructure, from a customer support, safe, reliable service, and then being able to sort of step out beyond your organization into your sector and starting to work with who would normally be viewed as competitors, and understanding that safety shouldn't be something that is a benefit for one organization and something that another organization doesn't understand, or safe delivery of safe product. While we look at electric sector importance because of the rapid scale in which it can cause outages, we should also look to water, as mentioned, that's the one product that comes into your house and you consume it, you put it in your body, versus we always talk about you hit a switch and the lights go on and it's magic. But in a similar way, every single thing that is coming in, we rely on, that we interact in our lives. So not just growing in your organization and knitting it together, but working across your sector and then going from sector to sector. There are so many things we can learn from one another that it's really, really encouraging to see a panel like this come together. And I hope we can continue this dialogue into the hallway and well beyond this to inform and make all of our critical infrastructure stronger. Thank you again. It's been great having you all on.